I'd like to introduce Dr. Wilma Subra. She's a MacArthur Award-winning scientist. So we're not just making this up in a coffee shop. We have science and engineering. She is sought out globally to speak about water and protecting our water. Please give a big welcome to Dr. Wilma Subra.
Thank you, General, and thank all of you for coming here today. Louisiana has abundance of surface and groundwater resources. The quality and the quantity of these water resources are threatened, and you have heard that already a lot today. The water resources are at risk of being contaminated or are already contaminated. Industrial facilities in Louisiana discharge more than 12.6 million pounds of toxic chemicals into the surface water resources every year, and are increasing in quantity at a rate of almost 20% a year. We need to do something about that. The largest quantity of chemicals discharged into our rivers are from petroleum facilities, paper mills, fertilizer manufacturing, and electric generating plants. And some of you have all or some of those in your communities. There are more than 50 toxic chemicals that are being discharged that do not have water quality criteria to regulate the quantity being discharged. These toxic chemicals are allowed to be discharged into our precious surface water resources by more than 85 large industrial facilities. As a result of the historic discharge of toxic chemicals into the surface water bodies, the chemicals have bioaccumulated up the food chain and contaminated various fish species to the level that human consumption advisories have been established for 53 of our 64 parishes. 53 of our 64 parishes have consumption advisories for people not to eat the fish or eat limited quantities of the fish. The parishes with the largest number of water bodies posted for human consumption are Calcasieu, Catahoula, Evangeline, Ouachita, and St. Tammany parishes. How many of you here today are from any one of those parishes? Pay attention to the advisories in your parish. The toxic chemicals that are in the fish consist of hexachlorobenzene, hexachlorobutadiene, polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, priority organics, creosote, lead, arsenic, dioxin, DDT, toxaphene, and mercury. And mercury by far is responsible for the most human consumption advisories. 52 of the 64 parishes have mercury consumption advisories. Capitol Lake, just right over here at the end of the Capitol, is contaminated and has its consumption advisories of organic contaminants, priority organics, PCBs, and many decades there are signs in the lake in Vietnamese not to fish in the lake. Then we have Devil Swamp up north of us in the Alston community, and they're contaminated with hexachlorobenzene, hexachlorobutadiene, PCBs, lead, mercury, and arsenic. And those people don't have other sources of food. They go into Devil Swamp to hunt and fish and put it on their table. And if they don't put it on their table, children have nothing to eat. And this is all from water contamination. And then the Amy River here in East Baton Rouge Parish is contaminated and has consumption from mercury. In addition to the industrial facilities that contaminate the surface water resources with toxic chemicals, many of the industrial facilities that were constructed before the 70s also have contamination of their groundwater resources under the facilities. And as the Mississippi River flows right by the Capitol here today, past Baton Rouge, it's not only contaminated with toxic chemicals, it also carries a very heavy load of nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus, compounds which originated as fertilizer applied to agricultural fields in the upper portion of the Mississippi River, mainly in the I-states, Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa. And it is the result of runoff and rainfall on these agricultural fields that brings it into our river. When the nutrient load reaches the Gulf of Mexico and surrounding bays, the phytoplankton prosper on the nutrients, and then they die, sink to the bottom, use up the oxygen, and that becomes the dead zone. The nutrient loading results in the dead zone, which results in the degradation of aquatic life in the area of low water. And in the coastal areas known as the Louisiana territorial seas, which are located 3 miles off the coast of Louisiana, where a lot of you fish. That's where the dead zone is, but it's also the location of oil and gas exploration, development, and production. And you heard the general talk a lot about the abandoned wells, the orphan wells. The oil and gas facilities in the territorial seas are located in Cameron, Vermilion, Iberia, St. Mary, Terrebonne, Lafourche, Jefferson, and Plaquemine Parish. I'm sure some of you here today are from those parishes. And these facilities are allowed to discharge produced water into the territorial seas under the terms of a general permit. Insufficient testing and monitoring of things like benzene, radioactive elements, heavy metals are discharged into the water column, and DEQ failed to address the potential environmental impacts required and testing and monitoring. So Lien filed suit and actually had the appeals court judge remand it back to DEQ. So the industry is having to do studies to determine exactly the extent of this contamination on the aquatic organisms in the territorial seas. Remember, again, from the coast out 3 miles. And the oil and gas industry is also developing shale plays. I saw a couple of signs here today about shale. And they're developing in Louisiana in the northwest portion, the Haynesville Shale around Shreveport, and from the Texas border into Mississippi, which is known as the Tuscaloosa Shale. And they use large quantities of water in the hydraulic fracturing process. And then in North Louisiana, they're encouraged to use surface water, mainly from the Red River and from the aquifer under that, only if absolutely necessary. But here, along the northern part of West Baton Rouge and Tuscaloosa, they're allowed to use groundwater. So the Chico, the Baton Rouge aquifer, and all the aquifers in this strip will be depleted as a result of shale gas development and shale oil development, because once they put that water down the wells and comes back up, they put it into injection wells, and it's lost to the water cycle forever. The freshwater and saltwater resources of the state of Louisiana need to be protected, and that's what we're asking you to help us do, in order to ensure environmental damage is not occurring and causing negative impacts to the flora, the fauna, and humans that heavily rely on water quality and quantity for survival now and into the future. So please, please help us work on the water issues. Thank you.
Wilma is our secret weapon. When the administrator of EPA walk in the room, they bow to Miss Wilma, because she knows what she's talking about.